I'm going to walk you through a mini After Effects project just to give you a sense of how After Effects projects are organized. So we'll start After Effects from scratch here by double-clicking on this icon. Displays that splash screen again. And if you watched the previous lesson, you know why the start screen did not show up. I don't want the start screen to show up when I start After Effects, and I made that happen by going to Preferences. In Windows, that's Edit Preferences. On a Mac, that's After Effects Preferences. Going down to here, clicking on General, and then I uncheck this thing, Show Start Screen at Startup. That's why. Now I want to open up a project, and you'll be doing this frequently throughout the course, so you might as well get started now. To do that, I go to File, Open Project. Controller Command O is the shortcut for that. And I go to my desktop, and on my desktop there's the Materials folder. Double click on that. And inside the folder are the assets and the After Effects projects. I double click on this folder there, and there is the 01 mini project. Double click on that, and that opens up that project. All right, let's just take a look at what we have here. Over in the project panel, we've got assets and solids and a comp. And you also have a preview window right there. So if I click away from comp 1, then the preview will go away. If I want to preview other things, I can go to the assets, and there are 3 assets here. There's a background photo, a shot of this woman here on the left, and a photo of this woman on the right. You'll notice the backgrounds are black. That's because they're actually transparent, and I'll show you that in a second. Let's take a closer look at the background by just double-clicking on it. And you can preview something inside the footage panel by double-clicking over here. This is the footage panel, not the composition panel. Notice the 2 different things here. It opened up because we double-clicked on an asset over here. So we have this photograph of this pampas grass that I'm going to use as a background. If I double-click on woman 1, she opens up over here, and it looks for all the world like she has a black background, but in fact it's transparent. Black is the default color when you have transparency. You can see the transparency by clicking this little checkerboard down there. Now you see the transparent areas. I created this inside Photoshop. This is not something we do in After Effects. I took a photograph and removed the background in Photoshop using some tools there. Same thing is true for the second woman. Double-click on her, click on transparency, and you can see the transparency around her. Alright, there are a couple more things here inside the project panel. There's this comp, which is this collection of layers down here. I'll click this disclosure triangle, you can see all the layers there. And then there's something called solids. There's one solid, the dark gray solid, which is this guy down here. Your assets and your comps and some layers that you create down here are up here inside the project panel. You place these assets or create layers down here in the timeline. Once you place something down here, it's a layer, even though it started off as an asset. But we refer to all of these guys as layers down here. Now there's several things here that are not up here. For example, there's a camera. It's a camera layer, no camera up here. And there's also some text down here, this multiplane animation text down here. Those do not reside inside the project panel. They just reside down here in the timeline, and you create them within a timeline. If you take a look at how this is laid out, there's this camera up here. The camera can be anywhere, it just happens to be on the top here. And the camera is going to control some movement here. I'll show you that in a second. Then there's the woman on the left, and she has transparency around her. So you see what's below her here in the timeline. The woman on the right also has transparency around her, so you see what's below her, which is that background down here. Now appearing behind her is text and this gray thing here. The text is there, down here in the timeline, and beneath the text is a dark gray solid. It doesn't look so dark gray, right? That's because I reduced the opacity on it so you can see through it a little bit like that. So if it were 100% gray, you would just see a solid gray thing there, but I reduced the opacity on it. So the text, if you notice this, is above the gray solid. So this is a typical example of compositing. These 2 women on top here have transparency, so we can see what's below them in the timeline. The same thing is true for text, which has transparency all around it. And then the dark gray solid I made somewhat transparent by reducing its opacity. That's how all these guys kind of line up. Now there's some animation here. I animate the camera. So watch how the camera changes its focus from her to her and how it zooms in. It goes like this, starts changing, and the text fades away. And we zoom in on the woman on the left a little bit farther and keep the focus on her and have the background be even more out of focus as we zoom in on her. I created these animations using keyframes, and we're going to talk a lot about keyframes in this course. I'll just show you briefly what keyframes look like by clicking away for a second and pressing the U key. The U keyboard shortcut shows keyframes. And these are keyframes that controlled the camera and controlled the opacity on these 2 objects up here. If you go up here and see them fade away, that's the opacity keyframe at work. If you go up here, you see the camera movement is based on those keyframes down there. Again, we're going to talk about keyframes a whole lot. Now I've talked about how certain panels can open up under certain conditions, and then how do you deal with that if you want to go back to your saved workspace. I'll just briefly show you that. If I double click on this type layer down here, this text layer, double click on that, That opens up the character panel and the paragraph panel and highlights the text so you can edit it. After Effects assumes that if you double click on a type layer like this, you're going to want to edit it. And so it gives you these editing tools over here. Now if I click away, they stay there. They don't go away. So if I want now to go back to my saved layout, I go back up here to the menu here, next to Standard, click on that and say Reset to Saved Layout. And it goes back to the saved workspace that I made when I changed the standard workspace in the previous lesson. Alright, that wraps up this module. And as a reminder, here's what we covered in this module. I explained a little bit about what After Effects can do, some of its characteristics. I showed you how to set up the exercise files that we provided for your use in this course. I explained the basic After Effects workflow with the understanding that it's just a workflow. There are multiple workflows depending on what you're doing in After Effects. I gave you a tour of the workspace explaining the various panels and frames and what things do there. Then I showed you how to customize the workspace such that if you're the only person working on your computer, you can customize, let's say, the standard workspace and always come back to that one. Or you can create your own personal workspace should there be other people working in After Effects on your computer. And finally, I walked you through a mini project just to give you a sense of how things work inside After Effects. This all leads up to the next module where you're going to create a project from scratch.